Hello, everybody. Welcome to Daily Code's The Brief, our weekly show about politics. I am Marcos Molitzis. I'm here with Carrie Eleveld, my wonderful and amazing and so smart co-host. And it is election day. So we will be talking about Virginia, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, some other states that have some, action happening on the ballot, but really Virginia is the sort of the belle of the ball. And Virginia has a bit of a extra cachet in the political world because, the Beltway media is in the Beltway. They're right there. They're looking across the the sound.
They're bored in the off. They got nothing to do in the off.
They're bored.
Nothing to do.
Yeah,
they're bored,
and they need to build narratives heading into the the off-season cycle. And so the Virginia governor's race is always the year after a presidential election. So it's sort of like this means everything. What we're going to talk about today is, does it actually mean anything beyond whatever's happening locally in Virginia, whatever issues are driving the news in Virginia? And we're going to talk about, we don't know how tonight is going to turn out, but we have some hints already about what's happening in Virginia. And we can definitely look towards 2022 by examining if Democrats do well, if Democrats don't do well. What does it mean for the 2022 midterm elections? Sound good, Carrie?
It sounds good by me.
Sounds like a plan. So joining us right from the top, because why wait, is Carolyn Fiddler. She is comms director at Daily Kos. But more importantly for today, she is one of the nation's preeminent experts on state legislative politics and extra so for Virginia. Carolyn, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, yeah. No, thank you for having me. Today of all days, especially.
It's your Super Bowl. It's Carolyn Fiddler's Super Bowl.
Kind of is.
No, World Cup, because it's every 4 years.
There we go. Oh, I like that. Yes,
We're
it's my
just-
World Cup.
Right now, what we're doing is just managing Carolyn's anxiety. I mean, this is all about just killing an hour for Carolyn, where she doesn't have to be checking stats and checking Twitter and blah blah blah. She's just like, it's kind of like a meditative hour for her. So
I mean, I can't disagree with any of that at all. But I do have a lot of perspective on what's happening today that's helping ground me a little bit, because I've been doing Virginia politics for longer than I care to admit, because it dates me.
All right. This is okay. Great. Perfect. Tell us why you are a Virginia political expert. Let's tell our listeners and our viewers why we should trust you and your analysis on Virginia.
Because I've been doing Virginia politics, like state level Virginia politics, for slightly more than 2 decades now. I got my start as a wee baby intern when I was in college for the Virginia House Democratic Caucus. And the rest, as they say, is history. I've spent most of my professional life working in and around politics, definitely, and state politics particularly, because it's incredibly important and it's always very interesting. But Virginia obviously holds a very special place in my heart. It's where I got my start. And it's been really educational and fascinating to watch the Commonwealth go from where it started back in 2000, which was the beginning of real Republican dominance in the legislature. We already had some Republican governors, but in watching the party swing that way, and then the state swing that way, and then start swinging back. And it wasn't, people forget that Virginia kind of grew bluer in fits and starts. It wasn't like this long natural evolution that was just smooth and just went on its way. People forget that in 2009, there was a landslide where the Democrat very much did not win. A Republican, that's the last time Republicans had a governor in Virginia, was 2009.
Bob McDonnell won by 17 points in 2009. And just for context, remember, this is the year after this is the year after Obama was elected, and progressives were so frustrated that a piece of legislation was stuck in the Senate, held up by a handful of conservative Democratic senators, which sounds scarily familiar. Now, Carrie and I, I think we disagree. I'm a little more, you were a little more hopeful.
What? A little more hopeful about the agenda?
That the Senate, that the problems that Democrats are having with getting the Build Back Better bill out of the Senate isn't as dangerous to our 2022 chances as problems passing the Affordable Care Act in 2008 and 2009 were to the 2010 midterm elections.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if we've ever had that conversation, but I'm not quite as Debbie Downer about that because I'm never Debbie Downer. That's just not who I am. But I also think there's some, I mean, you can make the comparison between 2009 and now, but there's some fundamental differences between what Biden is trying to do and what the ACA was, right? I mean, they were, the whole Obama administration got entirely focused on this one piece of legislation that did one thing, and that was important, and obviously ended up bringing, millions of people into healthcare. So I am not, denigrating that at all. But this bill that the Biden administration is working on has a lot of stuff for not every, but for almost every group. It may not have everything that everyone wants. It certainly doesn't, but it's not just addressing one issue. It's addressing a multitude of issues, right? And so you're not going to have the entire progressive field of environmentalists and LGBTQ activists and, on and on, who are all like, but what about our issues, right? Because a lot of those groups, not every group is being addressed. I mean, I'm like, if I were an immigration activist right now, I would be tearing my hair out. And I am very pro immigration reform. So I don't want to be, I don't want to like cast myself as not in that camp. But if that were my sole issue that I were working on, I would be tearing my hair out, right? But there are sort of an array of things in this bill, and I think that's what makes it a little bit different than the 2009 situation. So
yeah,
also,
so Carolyn,
when it passes, Republicans are going to run on all that stuff that's in there like as hard as they can. They're going to try and take credit for stuff they voted against.
Yeah. So I'm being a little unfair to myself. I'm going to admit that, right? The comparison with 2009 and 2000. What is it today? 21. It's clearly not the same, considering that Bob McDonnell, a Republican in 2009, won by 17 points. It was a different Virginia. It was a different sort of climate. Nobody's thinking that the Republicans are going to win by double digits. If the Republicans win, it would be a narrow win. Carolyn, can you talk about sort of, I don't know if you remember 2009. I know this is a year that we probably want to block out, but can you tell us a little bit of that difference? What has changed in the last, 12 years?
Well, in Virginia, the major things that have changed is the party in power in the Commonwealth, and not just like the gubernatorial office and election, but Democrats now have majority control of the General Assembly, which means Democrats have real power in the state to draft and pass laws to be signed or rejected by a governor who cannot actually, draft and pass laws themselves. So the landscape has evolved over the last decade in terms of Democrats becoming more powerful in the Commonwealth and exercising that power. In fact, one of my favorite stats so far today, Tuesday, Election Day, is that even before polls opened at 6 a.m. this morning, 1 in 5 eligible Virginians had already voted. That's a 20% turnout before polls even open. It's amazing.
over a million.
Because Democrats passed massive voting reforms that made it much easier to vote early, much easier to vote by mail, and it's going to be really fascinating just academically to see how that plays out in the electorate today. No matter which side wins, obviously. Please God, let Terry win. Youngkin would be a terrible governor for so many reasons. But
do you, for context, you were talking about 20% voted before even the polls opened. Do you know, just off the top of your head, what voter turnout was in 2017?
Oh, I thought you were about to ask about 09, which I can tell you was about 34%.
Okay.
What about 2001, Carolyn?
Yeah,
we want to know about 2001.
We are still credentialing Carolyn, right?
Yeah. I mean, I've never had to prove my bona fides. I get on here every week and I'm like, blah, 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 blah. No one's ever asked, well, what kind of authority do you have?
No, it's a real question, though. It's a real question. In 17, just for context, you say 20%, that's a lot. What was the turnout in 2017?
It was, I want to say it was like 2.6 or 7 million.
I think I just read that today. It was
Yeah.
2.7 million.
Yeah.
Is that
And
about 40%?
Some
Yeah.
people are thinking that we're on track now to blow past 3 million if what I saw was right.
That is a lovely hypothesis that I absolutely hope is true, and that 20% turnout before polls open makes that very possible. It would
Nothing but unicorns.
in Virginia.
Nothing but unicorns and rainbows on my end, blowing straight past 3 million into the governor's mansion, and we'll have paid family leave by next year in Virginia. Anyway, so if you want paid family leave, get to the polls. All right. So anyway.
Sure.
So there's a lot of tea leaves reading, whatever the analogy is, of what that means. What does extra turnout mean? My theory on turnout, generally speaking, if it's a blue state and you have high turnout, it helps us. If it's a red state, high turnout, it helps them, right? Because they're a majority of the people. On top of that, it's actually harder to get our vote to the polls than it is the Republican vote. They're older, whiter, wealthier, more rural, so it's easier to vote in rural precincts. It's harder to get our younger, from a socioeconomic standpoint, less advantaged. It's hard to get those people out to the polls. So if they're turning out in Virginia, a blue state, a young state, I think, because of those Northern Virginia areas that are, highly professional. This is a good sign, right? I mean, it has to be a good sign. Is there a scenario where high turnout actually is not a good sign in Virginia?
Oh, absolutely. Because you said in blue states, high turnout is good. In red states, it's good for Republicans. In blue states, it's good for Democrats. Virginia's purple. It's people have been calling it a blue state for a while, and I've been disputing that gently for a while. It is certainly trending blueward and getting, it's, I guess, more violet indigo end of purple towards blue, but it's not there yet. And historically, there's some data on this that came out of 2020 about how early voting isn't necessarily, high early voting turnout doesn't necessarily mean that Democrats are necessarily going to do better. Republicans also have a tradition of taking advantage of early voting. And so the fact that's been expanded and has become easier in Virginia doesn't necessarily mean that all those new voters or the majority of them are even Democrats. So it's a little bit of a crapshoot because this is uncharted territory in the Commonwealth.
I think in terms of the dynamic you were talking about, Marcos, too, one of the big question marks is, are the suburban voters who turned against Trump during the Trump era going to stick with Democrats or not? And these are high turnout voters, so they typically would have been a decent part of the 2017 electorate, and they'll be a decent part of the 2021 electorate. And the question is, do they stay loyal to Democrats or do they defect?
That's very insightful, and has been borne out by the fact that Youngkin decided that he was going to target these suburban voters with this whole banning books rhetoric. Terry doesn't want you to have a say in your kids' education. And
Toni Morrison. That Toni Morrison. Oh boy.
So can actually, I think people should hear a little bit more about that ad. Carolyn, can you tell us, because you're there on the ground? This ad has gotten a lot of ads. You've seen all the ads, but this one has gotten a lot of national attention. Can you tell us a little bit about the banning Toni Morrison book? Because it doesn't even say what the book is.
No, right? It's amazing. So, all right. So for y'all who have not seen the ad, picture this: a very concerned, white, very Karen-ish mom speaking to camera about how her gentle son, came home from school. Doesn't mention that it was AP, English, 12th grade. But her fragile son came home from school with this book that had scary things in it. And then she took this book to lawmakers in Richmond and had them read the scary parts, and their faces were just red because, they were so precious and fragile. And they tried to pass legislation to help ban books in schools because that's, historically a really great idea. Anyway, so yeah, her fragile son didn't want to do his reading assignment for Beloved. Let's be real. Ranted to his mom, and his mom made a thing of it. This kid is now a lawyer for the NRCC. This kid did just fine, although he's probably still pretty fickle.
I don't know if he ended up working for the Republican Party. Maybe he didn't turn out so fine after all. Maybe Toni Morrison broke him and
you know
turned him
what?
into a monster.
I would wager a lot of money that he never actually has read Beloved.
I'm
Wow.
willing to I'm willing to be with Carolyn on that bet. I don't think he did.
No,
Yeah, and this woman, this concerned voter, was actually a big Republican activist. I mean, like,
yeah, of
it
course.
wasn't just your average Virginia mom.
But here's what's key. He doesn't mention the book.
Nope.
Doesn't mention it's intentionally vague because he is trying to appeal to suburban voters who probably have a positive opinion of one of the great American authors of all time, definitely of this century. And so he's kind of trying to straddle this line between appealing to the book burners in his party, but not being overtly a book burner. So what's the framing in that ad that sort of is directed? It's trying to walk that tightrope because it isn't ban books. That's not going to work in the suburbs.
Right. It's just like there was something scary and controversial in this one book, which won the Nobel. Is that right?
That's
yeah. And well, the subtext is that, like, you know, in our white suburban schools, maybe we shouldn't be reading scary books by Black writers. But the thing about schools in Virginia is that they're actually pretty good. Most suburbanites, especially, are pretty happy with their local school systems. So I'm not sure who he's trying to rile up here.
So I've been, I don't know. I'm going to try this out for a second because I've listened to things, read things and whatever, and I don't have sort of the granular knowledge that you do, Carolyn, but it seems like what Youngkin has tried to do here. And if he wins, he will have succeeded in doing it. And if he doesn't win, he'll have failed, right? But it seems like he's turned education into sort of a grab bag of things. So, on the internet, the education issue is all about critical race theory and should we be teaching critical race theory, which is ridiculous because no one's teaching critical race theory. And every even in Loudoun County, where this became a big issue, all of the educators were like, we're actually not teaching critical race theory, right? But that's become the big buzzword for sort of the far right, right? And then there's a whole bunch of people who I think just generally have been frustrated with what's happened in schools over the last year, in terms of having to have the schools shut down and not, a lot of kids doing remote learning for a lot of time and then parents having to try to cover for that time period and whatever. And I think there's a lot of pent up frustration that he's tried to tap into. So I have definitely seen, like, on the internet, it's all CRT about education, critical race theory. And then, he's got this, the TV ads are this concerned parent who wants to get involved. And also, isn't there one where Youngkin is saying, I want to give more, put more money into education. And, and it's a much softer, like, more palatable feel for suburban voters. So he's kind of tried to just like heap a bunch of, I'm really distressed about what's been happening in schools over the last year and a half, everything from pandemic to race issues to masking, whatever. And he's just trying to like get all of that in one issue. Does that seem reasonable?
I think that's right. But instead of actually addressing the things that have actually frustrated and been plaguing, no pun intended, Virginians for the past year and a half, not being able to be in school because of there's a pandemic on, it is frustrating. And now we're moving back towards normalcy with vaccines and things, but there's still that frustration. And we're not back to normal yet. Kids are still wearing masks in schools and things like that. And, and parents are worried every day when they send their kids to school. Like, is this going to be the day that there's some sort of breakthrough case or something happens? Like, there's a lot of fear and frustration out there still. And you're right. He is absolutely trying to tap into that, but without doing like, hey, everybody get vaccinated, or hey, masks are good. This is how we keep our schools open, because that's not a Republican message.
Right.
So
there's a lot of sort of panic in the Democratic establishment in Virginia right now over the results, and there was some polling, I guess, that showed the race closer. I have this grand unified theory of American politics that says nobody's changing their minds anymore, right? We're stratified, we're locked in. If one side is going to win over the other side, it's going to be because of voter turnout. Like that's the big determinant factor in a lot of places. And then you have places like Kansas, no, Kansas is not a good example, but like South Carolina, where it's really hard for us to win, period, particularly federal races, just because of that stratification. Like there's nobody being convinced otherwise.
I just have to bring up Suburban Voters. I just have to bring them up because
this is where I'm coming.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
That's exactly where I'm going. If the polling is correct in Virginia, that it is getting closer, and I'm skeptical, but if the polling is correct, would that be the only demographic that is currently in play from a persuasive standpoint? Would it be those suburban voters? Is there anything else that looks remotely swingable in Virginia?
No. Easy answer. Sorry. No. No, there are especially this is easy to see in the Northern Virginia suburbs and close to where a lot of pundits and reporters live. Some of them even actually live in these suburbs. But this is the case in suburbs around Richmond and Hampton Roads too, where like people who are not super involved in politics, but traditionally might have sort of leaned Republican-ish, couldn't deal with Donald Trump, and now they have voted Democratic a couple of times and are more comfortable with it, but are, I think, also, still persuadable back the other way. And it is absolutely a concern. And like I said, that's why Young can win after this school issue, because he's like, oh, suburbia, I got you.
I mean, that's his only path to victory is to claw some of that vote back.
Right, because Trump turnout last year at Virginia wasn't very good.
Yeah, I mean, part of his path is to potentially turn out Trump voters, right? But that may not happen, right? So
he's been soft-pedaling that. So because there's no quicker way to turn those suburban voters off than to go full Trump. But then you want to motivate the extremists.
I mean, it's not even soft-pedaling. He was like panicked at the idea of, because Donald Trump hinted that he was going to go do a campaign rally in Virginia, and Young King was panicked. I mean, they were like, hell no. I mean, that would have been the end of that. And I'm a little surprised that Trump hasn't lost his marbles over this thing, right? He hasn't lost his shit over being repudiated that way.
Well, it's because it gives him an attitude to disavow it if Youngkin loses.
Yeah,
he doesn't know how this is going to go either. So he's like,
great.
My powder dry. It's fine.
Right. And even in his statement, like yesterday, he issued several statements yesterday because, he's got thoughts. And so sometimes it just doesn't matter. There's no discerning which are good thoughts and which are bad thoughts. Just put it out. So anyway, but in his statement, he's saying things like now, I don't trust Virginia elections. I don't really trust them. And, because bad things have gone on there and bad things happened and bad things will happen. But the only way to, get over that hump is to flood the system and everybody get out and vote. So he's giving these like really mixed messages about, oh, well, don't trust, your vote might not matter at all. And I don't trust Virginia elections, but you should get out there, and like any, no communications professional ever has said, send mixed messages. It's the best thing. Right. So like he is just, and then he had that rally last night and like none of this, I mean, the Youngkin, I am sure that they were like sick with panic when he suggested that he might come and visit Virginia. What was it, last Friday, I think? Mm-hmm. And I cannot imagine what kind of mayhem like happened in that campaign headquarters when they were like trying to verify and trying to get all the surrogates on the phone, because Youngkin can't call Trump. He's too thin-skinned and say, don't come, right? He can't say that because then Trump will flip. So they're probably like on the phone with Lindsey Graham. They're like, Lindsey Graham, quick, call Trump and tell him not to come for Virginia.
Right. The world's dumbest game of telephone.
Right. And then, use child psychology on him, reverse psychology, and like, tell him obviously he would really, but he can have plausible deniability if he hangs back or I don't know, whatever. Like, I can't even imagine. But
Right, but also
yeah,
at the same time, Youngkin is like raising things like, oh, election integrity. What if elections in Virginia aren't that secure? Which they're great, they're very secure. And he's floating these things that are Trump light. And you know, I'm old enough to remember when Democrats tried to do Democrat light, and that did not work out for us at all.
right.
So I don't see that working out too well for him, but I guess we'll see.
So I think one of the factors that's really in play in that sort of Democratic panic is this idea that Virginia is a bellwether for the 2022 elections, and if we do poorly, that means that we're in trouble next year. If we do really well, then we have a fighting chance. Right now in New Jersey, they are voting for a governor in New Jersey, and this is crazy because New Jersey, blue state, a Democrat has not been reelected in New Jersey in 50 years.
Wow.
50
in 50 years.
Whoa.
So the fact is, nobody's really worried about New Jersey. The
Chris Christie got reelected, and they can't reelect a Democrat.
Yes.
Are you like what?
New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy is headed towards what is looking like a very easy reelection. That, you know, this is not a normal thing for New Jersey Democrats, but of course, nobody's talking about New Jersey,
right? Because that's
everybody's talking about Virginia, and somebody on the internet. That's my sourcing.
I think if you're gonna, the chart you shared in Slack, I'm pretty sure that was from Sabato's crystal ball.
Okay, yeah, that's what it was.
Yeah.
So
that's a great
Sabato.
Plug for them. Great resource.
Yeah,
Right.
University of Virginia. So these guys are legit. And I'm not going to go through the chart, but basically it turns out that it's maybe not that much of a correlation. Terry McAuliffe won in 2013. Democrats did poorly in the 2014 midterm. You have 1997, Jim Gilmore, Republican, won. Democrats did fine. You look at this and there isn't really. 2009 was a wave year all around. It was obvious it was a wave year. Nobody's really thinking next year it's going to be a wave year. It's. I mean, if I had to guess right now, it's going to be a stalemate, and one party is going to win a handful of seats one way or the other, and that's going to decide the Senate, right? So, even a 50-50 race is going to be incredibly impactful. Nobody's really thinking wave at this point. If Youngkin, wins by 15 points tonight, then okay, then we can all say we're in trouble.
Then I'm going to have a really long year.
Anybody see that? Why is there so much focus on Virginia? And this is a softball for you, Carolyn.
Well, I mean, as a Virginian, I believe in the superiority of Virginia over most other states. I understand that is not a majority view in the nation, nor should it be. That's weird. So people should always be paying attention to Virginia. But Virginia has elections literally every year. And so in an off year, an odd numbered year, when there's just really not much else going on that's even remotely interesting, and New Jersey is kind of further away from DC and not that interesting, but Virginia's right there. It's right across the river. We can, I swear there's a piece in Politico the other day that was only written because John Harris, the founding editor, lives in a suburb where he saw some Youngkin signs. I'm not even kidding. I'm pretty sure.
I'm pretty sure I read that piece. Yeah.
Yeah. So these folks.
And I think the headline was something like, "This is how Democrats could blow it if they don't pay attention to the lessons of blah blah blah," or something like that.
I was never having read the piece. The time I spent on it. I really do.
It's interesting because, Carolyn, you mentioned how a lot of those reporters actually live in those Northern Virginia suburbs. And so they're surrounded by neighbors, and it shouldn't be that hard if they exist to find Hillary, Biden, Trump, Youngkin voters. It shouldn't be so hard if you're surrounded by it. Yet we've seen more than once where they have a supposed Democrat who's so upset at critical race theory. And then people dig in, and it turns out it's a Republican activist. It's happened multiple times.
I think you just call out Jeremy Peters at this point. That was so lazy.
New York Times. New York Times twice in the last week, I think, has had supposed swing voters who turned out to be Republican activists. I can't remember I don't know the specifics of the second story, but the first story is very clear, written by Jeremy Peters. It was a rough go. Okay, let me let me try something out here. So I've been thinking about, regardless of whether or not there's a consistent correlation between what happens in Virginia and what happens the next year in midterms, regardless of whether that's true, that's what we're going to get, right? So if it's close, even if Democrats win, everyone's going to be like, this is bad news for Democrats. Republicans
if it's closer than Biden's win here, everyone's going to like lose their minds and be like,
right.
Oh gosh. Except they're going to have a Democratic governor.
Right. And then they're going to lose their minds. They're going to lose their minds even worse if Youngkin wins. And what I was listening to 538 podcast, right? And they were talking about what the takeaways would be. And one of them, it's kind of talking about the education thing and Youngkin sort of walking this line. And then Republican candidates will be trying to recreate what Youngkin did, even if he loses, but it's close. And I was just thinking in particular, because we're starting to get a real feel for the Senate Republican slate of candidates, like Herschel Walker trying to do Glenn Youngkin. Okay. Sorry.
That line.
I just don't see it. I mean, what if Sean Parnell, a lot of these GOP candidates picked by Trump who haven't necessarily won the primary yet, but like they've cleared the field in Georgia for Herschel Walker. Sean Parnell in Pennsylvania, who his wife just testified under sworn oath yesterday that he choked her, that he hit their kids, that he left her on the side of the road, called her horrible things. I mean, this is like, it's unbelievable that these are the candidates that could potentially form the GOP slate. How are any of these guys going to be Glenn Youngkin on the campaign trail? It's a serious question.
Well, and this actually gives me a good chance to put on my state politics, generally speaking, hat. What a lot of sort of national observers, I feel like, don't fully appreciate about state level elections, less so with governor, more so with state legislative elections, but it definitely applies to governor as well, because even though it's a statewide election, it is still a state election that is in a I would say a healthy election run and lost on like state issues. There's the national environment is always a cloud over any election you have in any state, for sure. But most state elections, especially for legislature, which is also happening in Virginia, the House, not the Senate. These are issues that only apply to like these localities or to just a state, and they matter. They matter in ways that in these races that they're never going to matter in a Senate race. And so I think the national atmosphere has a lot more weight in a federal election than it's going to have in a state legislative election or most gubernatorial races.
Yeah, I mean, we see that in a place like Kansas, where Democrats can win the governor's race, or Louisiana, or even Kentucky, where these are blood red states with Democratic governors, supermajority Republicans in the state legislatures, and clearly they're not going to send any Democrats to the Senate anytime soon. And that's
hard to cover from DC, because it requires a level of expertise on these state level issues that's just really hard to have if your job is to cover all politics nationally. And so I'm not mad at any of these reporters for kind of missing these boats when they try, but
they live in Virginia. They live in Virginia. I mean, it's all they have to do is look out the window, metaphorically. But
they live in Virginia, but did they live in Virginia when Republicans were still running things back in the early aughts?
I don't know.
Do they remember Jim Gilmore trying to get rid of the car tax? I mean, things like this are important in history, because we have Youngkin talking about getting rid of the grocery tax in Virginia, which is a regressive tax and is, generally speaking, a good idea, but he's just trying to blow a hole in the budget. He wants to talk about raising pay for teachers and more money for education with one hand, and he's trying to eviscerate our tax base on the other without a plan for replacing it. And it's just that got tried before, and it sure as heck did not work.
Yeah, but I can also counter with the fact that Northern Virginia, how many people were living in Northern Virginia back during the Gilmore era that are living there now? And this is, that region has experienced explosive growth.
It's true. Although Northern Virginia was really happy with Jim Gilmore's proposal back then, because our car tax bills come due in October. So he wanted to get rid of it. Yeah, no, he won pretty, it was a smaller margin than Allen and a much smaller margin than the McDonnell victory in 09, but still.
He won by 13 points, but again, 1997 by 13 points.
I was going to say, but you're talking about the 90s when Democrats were also trying to be like Republican light,
Right.
So like,
Exactly.
It's not like anybody was pointing out what the flaw. I mean, I don't know. I wasn't there for sure, but it doesn't seem like, it's not like Democrats were providing this incredible alternative,
No. In fact,
right.
My current congressman actually, and then candidate Don Beyer tried to come up with his own, like, let's sort of roll back the car tax, like, light plan of it. And obviously that didn't work out for him at all. So
you mentioned the legislature. What is at stake in that battle for the Virginia to Senate, right? The upper chamber. What's at stake in that battle?
Chamber.
The lower chamber. Okay.
All 100 seats of the House of Delegates are up today as well. So the Senate will be up in 2 years, and that's only 40 seats. But Democrats currently have a 55-45 edge in the state House. And they have that majority, that edge, for the first time in decades. And they won that just 2 years ago. And so now they're fighting to hold on to it. They don't have to worry. They're running in the same districts they did last time around, which would not be the case if the Commerce Department hadn't screwed up the census so badly. But so same districts, defending majority for the first time in eons. And it's a nail biter. It's not that big. 5 seats is not that much. Especially when there was one victory 2 years ago by, I want to say, 24 or 27 votes. And I personally believe that Democrats will hold the majority. I think that we might lose a couple seats and maybe even flip a couple seats, but I think I don't know if there's gonna be a net gain, but I think that we will I think we'll stay above 50. Although, I mean, and we really need that if we end up with a Youngkin governorship, because
and what's the Democratic margin in the Senate right now?
It's 21-19.
Okay, so it's a very narrow margin.
It's very narrow, and one of those Democrats is Joe Morrissey, who sucks.
Okay. There's always one guy. There's always one.
What are the chances that his initials are JM?
Yeah. For context, one issue is that he is on the wrong side of his choice. He is not very in favor of reproductive freedom, and that's a problem. And which, that we haven't talked about the LG race, which is historic. No matter who wins it, there will be a woman of color.
The lieutenant governor's race.
Yeah. Yes. Sorry, my throwing around acronyms uselessly. Lieutenant governor runs the state Senate, and in the event of a tie, is a tie-breaking vote. So a woman of color will be leading the state Senate. Will be our lieutenant governor for the first time ever, which is very cool.
And she runs on a ticket, or are they individually elected?
They're individually elected. It's happened many times in Virginia history, with a Democratic governor or a Republican governor and lower folks of other parties. Creates quite an interesting dynamic. But Winsome Sears is her policy stances are scary. She might be very nice in person. I've never actually met her, but I do remember.
Who's that? Yeah, who's that?
Winsome Sears. She's a Republican candidate for lieutenant governor.
Okay.
Republicans have not been, using her on the campaign trail a lot because she's pretty extreme. Like, she was only in the House for 2 years, way back in the aughts, and she was too extreme for them even then. She wasn't a big player in the caucus.
So how'd she get the nomination? That's got to be a crazy story.
Well, that's just it gets into weedy nomination stuff,
what state party convention and
Republicans have been nominating. Yeah, Republicans have been nominating their candidates via convention for a while now, and it's given them some real extremists. And so she was her win to become the nominee, the lieutenant governor nominee, was just kind of attrition. You get the multiple votes, and people move from one candidate to another, just like another party convention vote, and she ended up winning.
Question, is that the way Youngkin got nominated too?
Yes.
Was via convention? Okay, he did. He must have bought off a bunch of people. He's apparently very wealthy. All right, good. I've nailed that. Okay, so
not even asking, Carolyn. You're
I know. I mean, let's be clear. He's got a lot of money. He's self-funding his campaign. He bought a lot of people off. There's new yachts and everybody, whatever. I don't know. But, okay.
I mean, Virginia has a lot of waterfront.
Just a disclaimer, I haven't really done any investigative reporting on that. So it's like just pure conjecture, you know.
I mean, Youngkin has given $20 million of his own money to his campaign. Who knows what else he might have spent his own money on?
Right. So who knows?
Yachts. We're ready to determine that.
Yes.
Deep investigative.
So
parade.
I heard it on Daily Kos first. Okay. So anyway, I do have a question though. So if it turns out that so you worked on a piece about what to look for tonight. Mm-hmm. Was it specific to Virginia? Can you give us a few hints about things that I haven't read it yet, and it's my own fault. But I would love to hear things that you're looking for as you watch the returns come in tonight. You know, telling races, telling districts. I don't know, whatever.
Well, I mean, turnout obviously is a big thing to keep an eye on. And for the first time, absentee precincts will be tabulated early as opposed to like after the rest of the in-person election day votes. So the early votes will be hopefully available. Those numbers will be available much earlier in the evening than they were, say just last year. They weren't available till about, I want to say 11 o'clock Eastern time. So, and polls in Virginia close at 7, just by the by.
So it used to, just a contrast, it used to be then that if Republicans had an early lead, Democrats could be like, but our mail-in votes haven't been counted yet. Right. Is that true? And so but now it shouldn't be a situation where Republicans have an early lead. It might actually be a situation where Democrats do. Is that true?
Possibly. That's the thing. We're in a little bit of uncharted territory right now. So,
gotcha.
But we might, instead of like a red mirage, which is what we saw last year in some places where Republicans showed up really strongly in person, but a lot of Democratic votes were cast early, and then those leads switched, and Republicans everywhere tried to cry foul, and that was garbage. But hopefully, counting those early votes earlier in Virginia will help make the actual results a little more clear tonight. So yes, turnout's a big thing. Traditionally, the larger places like Fairfax, the largest county in the state, those results do tend to come in late. So there's always a freak out early because Republicans do better than they should, just because so little of Northern Virginia has actually come in. And Fairfax just comes in late. It's what they do.
And I think those precincts have like 8 million people in them, because it's like 3 precincts left. Republicans leading, and then bam, we win by 6 points.
It's almost that bad. Yeah.
And always late in the night too.
So Fairfax
for California
is a very blue leaning.
Extremely, it's extremely blue and extremely large. So you get a lot of votes out of there, and they tend to be pretty Democratic.
So don't freak out until Fairfax is in. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Which is basically the last to come in.
So traditionally, but who knows? They might surprise us tonight. It's it's a whole new landscape we're working with here. And so because of what I focus on, state legislatures, I'll be watching the state house returns, and I'll especially be watching certain districts around Hampton Roads and the Richmond suburbs. Those results are likely to come in earlier than some parts of Northern Virginia, and the way those seats go and those counties go, it's going to tell us a lot about what the statewide situation is as votes sort of start to trickle in from various localities. The smaller rural places always report first because they're smaller, fewer votes to count. So a lot of those early votes are just going to be red. That's how it is. Everyone needs to take a breath and not start freaking out until at least 10 p.m.
10 p.m.
Eastern time, then you have license to freak out.
Yeah. So I know I just spent some time earlier on the show sort of poo-pooing the idea that tonight's results have relevance to 2022. I'm gonna actually walk that a little bit and just talk about the things that I actually am paying attention to that I think are going to be important. 2022 is going to be a base turnout election. If our base turns out in votes, that looks good for us. Even if they maintain that same ratio via Republicans, that's good. There is always a fear that our core base will not turn out. That was the case in California. The press and the DC press was all really excited at the idea of the Democrats losing the governorship. And
drama.
Turns out in the end that it was the same margin as California Governor Newsom's margin of victory when he first was elected governor. So maybe the freak out. Yeah, go ahead, Carrie.
Well, just a note too that was a huge polling whiff there but the polls showed that he was going to win by about 15 points and he ended up winning by 24 points, I think. So the polls were almost 10 points off there. So I feel like polling in the Trump era, no one's cracked the code yet. Sometimes it's been decent and sometimes it has not been. It was off in California, even though the prediction was, Newsom survives, right? He survived by a whole heck of a lot more than what the polls showed. Okay, I'm sorry. So
that's great. That's worth bringing up because it was off in Virginia 4 years ago too.
Right.
I mean, Northam ended up winning by like 8 points, and that was like a statistical dead heat going into election day, according to the polls.
Right. They undercounted Democrats.
It's tough. Yeah, it's tough to poll Trump voters. Mm-hmm. It's tough to poll young voters of color who aren't going to pick up a phone and answer any pollster question. And so there are challenges in this modern world in states where you have a preponderance or an election. I mean, if you know Trump's on the ballot, the polling is suddenly like really suspect because we know for a fact that the nihilist Trump voter isn't going to be answering no pollster and telling them what they really think. But okay, so I will be looking at our base turnout. How's youth turnout? How is turnout amongst Black and brown communities? That's going to be very, very important. Are they being demoralized by what's happening in DC, or is that connection that I think we did see in 2010, 2009, 2010? Is that just not a thing these days because we are so hyper partisanized? And I actually think we're smarter now. I think Democrats can look at the Democrats in the Senate and say, yeah, Manchin and Sinema are the problem, not the Democratic Party generically. That didn't exist back in 2009. Nobody was blaming Max Baucus and Joe Lieberman outside of our little bloggy circles, which was a very small part of the progressive movement back then. So the other thing I'm going to be looking at is suburban voters, right? This is Carrie and I. This is one of our big obsessions, of course. Are suburban voters still winnable for the Republican Party? If this message resonates, it's a different question if somebody like Herschel Walker or Ron Johnson in Wisconsin, can they mimic it? That's a whole different question. The question is there a message that still can move suburban college-educated women back to the Republican Party, back to their ancestral roots?
I really hope it's, don't make your kids read Beloved.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping not, obviously, but we're going to actually have empirical evidence this week. And actually, I wouldn't discount New Jersey because the Republican running in New Jersey is actually running a very moderate, never Trumper style campaign. I think he's been sort of erased because he's, like you said, he doesn't. Those Beltway political reporters don't live in New Jersey, right? So there's
no drama. Everyone knows, the Republicans not going to win there. So who cares?
Also, I think there's a tendency to think, well, what this is about suburban moms, but I'm pretty sure, I think it was the Washington Post ABC poll that showed that suburban moms were still, who do you trust on education? They were kind of still like, this may have been Virginia wide. I'm sorry. I think it was Virginia wide, but it was like kind of 50-50 among women. Who do you trust on education? But men had gone like 10 points in the direction of Republicans. So, this whole like education thing that usually is a Democratic issue, Democrats poll better on it. If it's, it may not, there may be a gender bias too, in terms of what happens with education. So, I mean, it's just another layer of something to watch for.
Oh, but definitely. Anyway, I think that's very, very sharp. Men.
So it's that's why I don't say suburbia is moving towards us. It's college educated women in suburbia are moving towards us because men,
the men are not.
Men are rough. So
men are rough.
I just talked about the
you said it, Marcos. You said I'm the lesbian here. I didn't say it. I'm just saying.
I'll say it. I'm self-aware. Right. I'm self-aware of my people. Okay, so I talked about how I'm really going to be watching Suburban Vote, and I'm going to be watching the sort of base core Black, brown, young vote. Carolyn, is there something else?
Loudoun County, and everyone should be watching like Henrico, Hanover, and Chesterfield. Everyone's really hung up on Loudoun because it's close to DC, and there are a bunch of noisy school board meetings there. But it's other suburbs in Virginia that I think are being more representative of other suburbs in other states.
Will you name suburbs again?
Yeah, suburbs of what? Are there still DC suburbs?
No, these are suburbs of Richmond. Hanover, Henrico, Chesterfield.
Okay.
What makes them different than Northern Virginia suburbs?
Well, they are not across the river from DC. They're a little less impact. Well, and they're not in the DC media market, so they get less of the DC news bubble. Your issues there are just more local. As someone who grew up in the Richmond media market, I can tell you, like that the news coverage is very different. They certainly pay attention to national issues, but there's a lot more local stuff.
Okay, so you'll be watching the Richmond suburbs, and what are we looking for? If there's a shift in the vote margin between Joe Biden and Terry McAuliffe this time?
Yeah, definitely. And there are some House seats there that are being really hotly contested, and Democrats' majority could rest on that as well. But yeah, Terry's performance there could end up being really educational about what we might see next year in other suburbs and other places. I think Loudoun is just so saturated with activists right now and DC bubble coverage and people that I just don't think it's going to be quite as instructional for the rest of the country.
Oh, interesting. So the thesis is that Northern Virginia has its own dynamics that don't really reflect broader suburban America.
Yes, I would say that.
Right,
I love Northern Virginia, but it's not normal.
That's helpful. Carrie, is there anything you're looking at specifically, or is it basically, suburbs as well?
I mean, I'm definitely focused on turnout. I mean, I don't think I can say anything new that I haven't said already. I'm focused on turnout. I think I'm really focused on this idea that somehow there's going to be takeaways that can be useful here, because I feel like there's such that the media has already sort of missed the mark on what education is. They've made it so much like about critical race theory, when I think it's been this, as we discussed earlier, broader grab bag of issues. And I'm just like, can't imagine that the takeaway, regardless of who wins, if it's close, either way, Republicans are going to try to make a big deal out of it. And I just don't know that they really are going to be able to zero in on what it was that Youngkin did. They're going to spin something. Okay. They will spin something, and the media will eat it up that this is the thing. But I would caution everyone before, number one, they go into a panic about next year. And that number two, the idea that Republicans can recreate what Youngkin did, and that they even understand what Youngkin did. I mean, I don't think
Youngkin understands what Youngkin's doing.
I don't either. And the Republican Party is like so undisciplined. It is. I mean, Mitch McConnell like endorsing Herschel Walker is crazy. This is crazy stuff. So like the idea that they're going to have that, like, Kevin McCarthy is going to be able to like mastermind some sort of like, strategy based on what comes out of Virginia in order to, I'm not buying that. And I don't know who's going to win this election, but this whole idea that there's going to be some incredible lessons that, Republicans can glob onto. And God knows if they lose by 5 points or more, there's not going to be any lessons that they glob onto, because they haven't learned anything in 10 years of politics. Nothing.
I mean, I feel like they might learn that Youngkin should have embraced Trump more. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay.
So here's
what's the over under on Trump blaming this on Youngkin if Youngkin loses?
100%.
Yeah. What?
That's not a question.
No, we can stipulate that. That's already a fact. This is like a real fact, not a joke fact like yachts. But here's a question though. And we're running out of time, unfortunately. Holy crap. When we talk about expectations and Republicans saying if we keep it close, right? Like, how do we define if we keep it close? Now, Terry McAuliffe, when he ran, and we never mentioned this, but governors in Virginia are not allowed to run for re-election in consecutive terms.
Correct.
So Terry McAuliffe was governor back in 2013. Then in 2017, Ralph Northam won his 4 years, and now Terry McAuliffe wants another crack at it. He won in 2013 by 2.5 points.
Against Ken Cuccinelli, a dyed-in-the-wool proto-Trumper. I would say, like, he was way, I'm gesturing to my right, way before it was cool. I don't know.
Now in 2017, Ralph Northam, Democratic governor, won by 8.9 points, so nine points. But it was the year after Trump was elected, sort of at the height of the resistance, right? So there's an argument that we made that might have been inflated. So presumably, if I'm a Republican, I'm using 9 points as that baseline, right? Anything less than 9 points is a quote victory for the Republican Party.
Sure.
Is it really though? Is it really though? From where would you be worried? At what point, if Terry McAuliffe wins by 1 point, yeah, I think we all probably should worry. But like, is there a number that you would say that's the number where Republicans can legitimately declare victory?
50% plus one. Sorry, I'm just.
I'm already. Well, first of all, just so you guys know, the election's already been stolen, according to Gingrich and Steve Bannon, so it's been stolen. All right, so because if it's anywhere close, we cheated. So go Democrats, cheat better. Let's win. Let's steal more Senate seats next time. Anyway, but
I would argue that I would say that I think I wouldn't just argue. I would just posit, it's a fact that the national atmosphere is not super great for Democrats right now because we're in charge, and the throw the bums out energy is no longer in our favor. So Terry victory of 0.5 is still a victory for Democrats in this climate.
Yeah, a Terry victory of 0.5 is what she said. Yeah, right. So it basically, if McAuliffe wins, that's a win for Democrats. I think so. I mean,
he's facing massive headwinds that, of all the coverage, no one's really talking. I mean, people are trying to do the blame game, but they're not talking about the campaign in the context of just the fact. I mean, all right, people have talked about it, but I feel like it's getting a little undersold, I should say. The fact that the climate is just very different. It's.
I mean, not only is it climate
since 2013.
Yeah, not only is it different, but it's going to be different next year. I think we understand that. Trump is not going to stay quiet in Florida next year. He'll be bigfooting around, becoming a campaign issue. It would have probably been more helpful had Trump shown up to Virginia. We would have gotten a better sense of what 2022 is going to look like. The fact that they were able to keep him out, who knows? You're right. Lindsey Graham, I don't know who the hero was. There's a hero in the Republican Party that kept Donald Trump at home. That would have sort of given us a better baseline, I think, about what's coming next year for sure. And Carrie, I think you're absolutely right. Nobody's going to replicate the Youngkin formula. I think it's going to be Ron Johnson in Wisconsin, Sean Parnell in Pennsylvania.
But if Youngkin does win, the lesson's going to be keep Trump out, which is going to change the dynamic a lot nationally.
Except that Trump's not going to be kept out. Trump's
already cleared the field for Herschel Walker. Herschel Walker is already the GOP nominee, even though he hasn't won it yet, technically in Georgia. You know what I mean? They cleared the field for him. So, I don't know what's going to happen I don't know what's going to happen in Pennsylvania. I don't know what's going to happen in Missouri, which is, probably a much less likely Democratic pickup. But, but I'm just saying, whether or not Republicans want to keep him out, they haven't proven capable. Mitch McConnell just bowed to Trump's wishes on Herschel Walker, which is frankly one of their best pickup opportunities. That is nuts. So if
Herschel Walker, just to be clear, his claim to fame is he was a famous college football player.
Yeah, and he
That's also in the South. Look at Tommy Tuberville.
He also allegedly told his ex-wife that he was going to blow her brains out. And I should have. Really, I don't mean to be traumatizing anyone who has experienced violence or abuse, but he said that to both his wife and allegedly and one of his ex-girlfriends.
And that should be disqualifying for any candidate.
That should be disqualifying. So if their lesson is we need to keep Trump out, good luck. Not a single fucking one of you has the backbone to do it. Good luck with that.
Yep. And again, I don't know how they managed in Virginia.
They pointed to Biden's margin, and they're like, "Nah, you might not help, bro."
You'll get blamed if we lose, and that might have kept them out. That it's enough. Yeah. So, guys, we have a minute left. Carolyn, any last thoughts? Any last thoughts heading into tonight?
Lightning round, Carolyn.
Oh well, if you're watching this live, you still have an hour and a half to get in line and go vote if you haven't done it already, if you live in the Commonwealth. So please do that. Or if you live in other places, we've been talking about Virginia, but there are many other elections also happening today, and they are all important.
And the Daily Coast elections team will be following them all night.
Yes.
And there's primers on Virginia, as well as I think other elections that are taking place tonight, right? So
important Supreme Court race in Pennsylvania.
Yep.
And we need to keep those courts in our hands because we know Republicans are going to try to steal elections. It's now coded into their very DNA. And there's municipal elections, mayorships, and city councils. And those are all important. And in fact, they all impact your life very, very directly. And they also they're kind of the farm team for our candidates as they move up to higher office and eventually federal office. So we really need to start winning those local elections. So do what you can to definitely vote. I mean, I'm sure if you're listening to this or watching this, you probably already voted. But this is good practice for next year because next year is going to be epic. Everything basically is resting on next year's election. So hopefully, fingers crossed for tonight. I'm sure next week we'll be Carrie and I, and we're going to be talking about what the results in Virginia, maybe what they mean, if anything at all. Yeah, and hopefully we have good news to tell. But this is democracy. This is what we're fighting for, and so it's exciting. Election day is always exciting. It's an expression of our nation's heritage. It's a democratic, it's a democratic nation. Unfortunately, we have Republicans.
Just a reminder. Just a reminder that it's still a democratic nation, right? Okay.
And apparently now this is being contested every election cycle, which is absolutely devastating for us as a nation that this is even in question. But that is where the Republican Party is today. So we got to fight. We got to organize. And no matter what happens tonight, we got to keep the pace up, and we got to actually increase it because next year is absolutely critical. Thank you so much, Carolyn, for joining us. That was an incredible conversation. Learned so much about Virginia. Carrie, you're wonderful. You're my favorite co-host, and
I'm your only co-host, so it's good that you like
right
me.
Here.
I know.
Sorry. Technically, like the official title.
Yeah, official title. Yeah. And
I'm right here.
You're my favorite guest co-host. And then when Kara's on, she'll be my favorite guest co-host.
Kara. Oh my goodness, Kara's in the green room.
I know. I'm doomed. There's no way for me to dig myself out of this one. That's what I get for talking too much. Thanks to Walter Einenkel for being our producer and doing such a great job. Kara for being our social media and feeding us
second favorite co-host.
Apparently, can they all be favorite co-hosts?
They're all my favorites. They're all my favorites. I'm just saying.
And thanks to you, the viewer and listener, for joining us every Tuesday or Wednesday if you're listening to the podcast, or whenever you're listening to the podcast. Please favorite us, subscribe to us, whatever your platform of choice asks you to do, so you can keep listening to us every week. Thank you so much. Love you all. Keep fighting. Fingers crossed for tonight. See you all next week.